I have asked you all here today so that we can bring everyone up to speed on the progress of the Fifth Crusade in general, and more specifically, the parts that are being played by those in this room. But before we get into our most current situation, I wish to review the facts and details that have gotten us to this point in our battle. I have asked one of our most illustrious bards, Opus Dei, to summarize the history of the World Wound conflict for us. Thank you, Queen Galfrey.
This Skari is described in numerous ancient texts as a gargantuan being, seemingly human from the waist up, with a locust-like body beneath it. From his back, clouds of swarming insects protrude, forming nightmarish wings, and numerous accounts speak of an insectoid face with features that could only come from the foulest of realms. Fragments from the Book of the Damned tell us that in his new realm, Skari discovered an abnormality in the planar barrier between worlds, a thinning between the rasping rifts and Golarion. Intrigued, the demon lord started to exert his will through the thinning, and his corruption of the land, then known as Sarkoris, began. It was in the year 4598 AR the nation's fated destruction began to unfold. The fear and skepticism of arcane magic was still prevalent in Sarkoris, and religious leaders made sure that anyone that threatened their vision of divinity was dealt with. The practice of wizardly magic was strictly forbidden by the country's priests. In the North Mounds, on the height of the High Cairns, stood the Threshold, an immense fortress tower said to have been built by the frost giants who once ruled the land. Here, the most powerful arcane spellcasters were kept as honored prisoners, allowed to practice their magic in an overseen environment. One of these prisoners was a witch by the name Arelu Vorlesh. She noticed the thinning of the planar barrier between Golarion and the rasping rifts. Filled with hatred for her captors, Arelu reached out to the plane beyond and found a power greater than she could have hoped for. Skari. Arelu Vorlesh seized control of the upper reaches of the Threshold, still unable to completely escape. She became Skari's emissary in Sarkoris, but without her betrayed allies, she could not fully reopen the gates. With her daily nurturing, however, the portal to the abyss grew from pinprick to a tome-sized tear, and in 4602 AR, Vorlish and a horde of tiny fiends overwhelmed the rest of the Threshold, slaying her captors and converting many of the prisoners into cultists of Skari. By 4605 AR, her influence had grown to encompass much of the High Cairns, but still, support from beyond proved minor, and her conquest went largely unnoticed. This all changed when Arodin died. Whether Skari was emboldened by his old enemy's death, or if it was mere coincidence, we don't know. But only a few weeks after the last Atlantis fall, the world wound opened. It was in the Threshold the tears started. First a crack in reality, then a growing gate, and finally a festering wound that would threaten the entire world. A mile-long cosmic tear opened and outpoured the demons. It wasn't until 4622 that the First Mendivian Crusade against the demons of the world wound began. It was the Church of Iomedae, whom was now also known as the Inheritor, that led the crusade. When the Crusaders reached Mendev, Sarkoris had been overrun long ago, and significant portions of Mendev had fallen to the demons as well. But the Crusaders bolstered the strength of the defenders of Sarkoris and Mendev, both in numbers and moral. The demons were not prepared for such resistance and were driven out of Mendev and back towards the North Mounts. As the demons were driven further back, the Crusaders built several fortresses, establishing a strong defensive line and a lasting foothold. The mightiest of these fortresses was constructed by a small army of dwarven crusaders who drew upon the knowledge of their forefathers to build the fortress in the style of the ancient sky citadels, and they named it Drezen. Mendev welcomed the additional forces, many of whom stayed and fortified the city of Canabres. The clans of Sarkoris accepted these new residents. After 6 years, in 4636 AR, a new wave of demons erupted from the wound. The Crusaders that had stayed in the liberated lands took up arms once more, expecting a short-lived battle. But they were gravely mistaken, for the demons came out in much larger numbers, and they didn't sweep the land in a chaotic manner as they had in 4606. This time, the demons were organized in ranks, following the orders of powerful demon commanders. They orchestrated strike forces and teleported behind enemy lines and drove the defenders towards the demons' front ranks, crushing them in between the demon forces. It was with these tactics the armies of the Merilith Aponavicius took the city of Drezen. A new crusade was called by the Church of Iomedae in 4638, but even with the large reinforcements that came to the defenders' aid, it was clear that the demons still outmatched them in numbers and strength. The leaders of the Mendevian Crusade took a crucial and fateful decision. They pulled their troops out of Sarkoris, instead focusing on defending their own borders and containing the demons.
We must protect the surrounding lands. Thousands will die.
They did this by raising ward stones along the West Salin and the Montrey rivers. These ward stones contained the demons, as the stone's magical properties prevented the fiends from passing between them. The leader's choice to do this saved tens of thousands of lives, as the ward stones prevented the demon hordes from entering Mendev, Numeria, and Ustalav. Sarkoris, however, was lost. Years passed, and though the demons kept pressing towards the borders, they seemed content on ravaging and plundering the fallen nation of Sarkoris. Meanwhile, the Crusaders in Mendev started to squabble among themselves. Infighting and accusations of one group or another became more and more common. The Crusaders had started accepting less trustworthy individuals to join the war effort, as the Church of Iomedae was becoming more resource-strained. But another force was also at play. Cultists of the demon lord Baphomet infiltrated the Crusaders and spread corruption throughout the ranks. When the Third Mendevian Crusade was launched in 4665, it was as much to galvanize the Crusaders as it was to defeat the demons. But it was short-lived, as the Crusaders fought the demonic corruption within their ranks through witch hunts. It led to many becoming paranoid as they began targeting indigenous Celts and those who had heard to older Sarkorian beliefs.
This is clearly an agent of Baphomet.
The Mendevian government ended the crusade in 4668 AR, as it had all but collapsed under its own internal fighting. But the ward stones and warriors of the surrounding lands still held the demons at bay, and while they ruled the lands all know as the World Wound, it would be more than 2 decades before the demons once more threatened the lands beyond. In the year 4692 AR, the powerful Baelor demon Koramzadeh, general of Discari's armies in the World Wound, attacked the city of Canabres and managed to crack the ward stone within the city. The Baelor and his forces were driven back, and Koramzadeh was nearly slain by the silver dragon Terendeler. Though the attack had failed, Karamzadeh's success in reaching the ward stone and damaging it worried the Mendevian leaders. As a response, the Church of Iomedae called for a fourth crusade. This was the longest and most grueling of the crusades, and in the 15 years it lasted, the losses on the demon's side were minimal. The crusade ended in 4707. As the Crusaders grew weary, resources grew scarce, and winning the war started to seem hopeless.
Thank you, Opus. This was the state of affairs until Arodus the 16th of this year, only 4 months ago, on the celebration day of Armas, when Canabres was attacked by Koramzadeh and his horde. On that day, the Canabres wardstone was broken, and Terendelev, the guardian of the city, was murdered. What followed were weeks of death and destruction in the city, matched only by the acts of bravery and astounding competence its citizens and of the group of adventurers sitting here in this room today. Not counting the numerous selfless acts to help injured individuals, some in this very room, they destroyed the damaged wardstone, thereby preventing Aru Vorlesh from using it as a weapon to kill thousands of crusaders. Then they led your army to Drezen and retook this historic fort while ending the careers of 2 very disturbed dwarves. In the 2 months after that, they had a string of remarkable successes, including 9 separate engagements with the enemy without casualties, except their friend Terendar, who I am glad to say is alive, well, and continuing our fight on the southern border. There is more to speak on this, but that can wait. They liberated a dwarven temple of Torag, made travel safe between Canabreus and Drezen, rescued Arushala, who is a priceless resource, ended the lives of countless demons, and killed a frickin' dragon. That's the one that kills me. Anyway, as if that was not enough, they crushed the Templars of the Ivory Labyrinth, permanently ended the Worm that Walks and his band of misfit witches, the Blackfire Adepts, and destroyed the delivery chain of Nahindrian crystals, while recovering an invaluable trove of information that looks likely to break the backs of our adversaries if we act swiftly. All the while, convincing the general population that crusading is more fun than fireballs on Foundation Day. Though I must give credit to our loyal bards for some of this enthusiasm. As you know, I have already deployed almost a third of our Drezen troops to hold all of the forts, castles, and strongholds recovered by our heroes. The last regiment left for the fortress formerly held by the Templars of the Ivory Labyrinth this morning. Now, let us speak of this new information. Here is what we know. We know that the labyrinth was a distribution point for Nahindrian elixirs made from crystals mined from a secret location in the Midnight Isles of Nocticula's abyssal realm. This elixir gives amazing mythical powers to those who imbibe it if it does not kill them. We also know that Arilu Vorlesh, the discoverer of the crystals and the mastermind of the plan, has enlisted the aid of a priestess named Hepsamira. She is none other than the daughter of Baphomet himself. The whole thing has been done without the knowledge or consent of Nocticula. We must stop the production of Nihindrian elixirs. But the Gebrezu demon, who calls itself Jerabeth, escaped our heroes and is surely on her way to inform our enemies. So our window becomes very small. Prepare your troops. We leave on the morrow. Your orders will be forthcoming. Hello, friends. Thank you for joining us in the small conference room. Here is Araveshniel to give some insight to what your information has given us. Thank you, my queen. I have been tasked to explore the known interactions of demon lords and their minions, particularly Deskari, Baphomet, Arilu Vorlesh, Hepsamira, and now Nocticula. The information our heroes, my friends, have retrieved over the last 3 months, and especially most recently, has been very illuminating. Arilu has the brains. Hepsamira, the family connections. They both have the consent of Deskari and Baphomet. But Nocticula is as powerful as either of those two, and it's happening in her realm, built by her hand with the essences of her dead rivals. She does not play well with others, and there are hints in all of this that she might have ulterior motives to backstab her neighbors in the outer realms. If one could find a way to get her attention, perhaps it might be possible to make a deal with her.